Hi there, I'm Aditi Shaker and I'm the CEO and founder of Zeta. And today we have a treat for all of you guys because we have Briony Leo joining us from Relish. For those of you who don't know, Relish is a relationship training app that helps couples live their best life. And today we're going to spend time chatting with Briony to talk all about prenups. What are they? When should you get one? How do you even talk to your partner about a prenup? So Briony, why don't you introduce yourself to our crew?
Sure. So I'm Briony, and I'm the head of coaching at Relish. So basically what we do is we, like Aditi said, we basically help people kind of communicate better with their partners, use technology to improve relationships, open up communication, conversations around trust, infidelity, that sort of thing. So, I think particularly when we're thinking about prenups, that's a really prickly topic because often, particularly if we've come from families where there's been some disruption or conflict, this can be something that almost feels like we're kind of planning for the relationship to fail, or it's worst case scenario. So it's a very emotional topic, and I think it's really useful to be able to unpack it a little bit and just, even if it is something that you're wanting to discuss with your partner, make a bit of a plan around how that might happen.
I love it. And I would love to start with, tell me a little bit, because you get to talk to couples all day, every day. Tell me what you've seen in your conversations with couples. How are couples even utilizing prenups today?
Yeah, there's definitely a big change in the previous kind of perception of prenups. So, we've all read about like celebrities and billionaires having prenups and that being a condition of marriage. And basically the idea is it protects the person with the wealth, and it means that, somebody can't just marry them for money, or, they can't necessarily be exploited. So it's often been seen as kind of a one-sided thing previously. But in more recent years, probably as couples are going into relationships a bit later, so perhaps both people have a bit of wealth, or they've got some, some investments or some, properties, that sort of thing, they are kind of wanting to be a little bit more savvy about the financial side of things. And particularly that idea that when a relationship does kind of get into trouble, that's not when you want to, that's not when you're going to be able to talk about this sort of stuff. So for a lot of people, there's this perception that even though prenups are a bit awkward to talk about, especially if you're in the beginning stages of your relationship or you're just about to get married, it kind of sets you up for success in the future, because it's, it does make a lot of things really clear. But at the same time, it's important to have all the information.
I love that framing. I always joke that it's prenups are like defining what happens to the end of the relationship when you deeply love each other, rather than when you're really angry at each other. So I appreciate what you're talking about. Are there certain traits or like backgrounds or certain types of couples that you see who sign up for prenups more? Like, for example, my parents got divorced, so I was very open to a prenup, and it was something that was really top of mind. Is that a pattern or a habit you've seen?
I think probably, like you mentioned, if there's been divorce, it can kind of go both ways. So for some people whose parents have been divorced, the idea of a prenup is a bit triggering, because it's like, I'm not going to get divorced, or, I have to think about that. But like you said, it can also be a really kind of helpful and informed way of going about things. So I think, first of all, people who have that kind of insight and awareness that this is something that can happen, and it's not going to, you're not going to definitely get divorced if you get one, but it's just going to help. But also I think people who probably work in financial services, I would say definitely lawyers and attorneys, that would be on the top of their list. And a lot of probably, maybe professional people would kind of have a little bit more distance from the emotional side of things. So they might have come across it in their work. They might have heard about it from other people and understand it's more kind of a process thing, as opposed to how it used to be, which was maybe more one-sided.
It's an interesting thing, and one of the most common refrains I hear from couples when we talk about prenups is they have this seated belief that if you ask for a prenup, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, like you're setting yourself up for failure. And it's a refrain that I hear all the time. What do you think about that? Do you agree with that?
No, I don't think so. Again, I can understand where they're coming from, because again, it's, it is a bit counterintuitive to talk about the end of a relationship, when it's in its best stages. But I would say that kind of you really need to dig a bit deeper than that, and maybe somebody who has that perspective, and maybe that's the perspective of someone's partner. It would be really important to drill down a little bit and say, why do you think that? Why, what's going on there? Could this be seen as a bit of an investment in actually the longevity and the good of the relationship, and kind of reframe it a little bit like that. I feel like the one thing that I can tell you about prenups is that everybody has a different reaction to it across the board.
Totally.
There's no one sort of standard reaction.
Yeah, completely. And one of the things I always say is prenups are a little bit like health insurance. Like, nobody wants to get hurt. Nobody wants to, be suddenly medically induced or whatever, but you still have health insurance just in case anything goes wrong. So I think of it very similarly, but I don't feel as emotional about money in this context. So I might be an outlier. So let's talk about communication, because, that's your expertise, that you spend a lot of time with couples, helping them work through their communication. When do you suggest partners start talking about a prenup?
Yeah, I would say that when there are those kind of commitments happening in a relationship, so whether it's moving into that more committed stage, whether it's to do with some sort of marriage arrangement, moving in together, combining finances, having children. So any of those milestones that, that we consider a step closer to us sharing a life and a future with someone. So it's probably not something you want to bring up on like the first date, unless it's but I'd say it's one of those things that probably at any stage in a relationship, you would be having those conversations. It's like, what do you want for the future? Where do you want to live in 5 years? Do you want kids? Do you, what sort of work do you want to do? So it's kind of, it's probably going to be part of that picture. And I find a lot of people do end up having that conversation around the time of getting married, proposal. And that's a really tricky one, because it is a very different experience from the rest of the wedding preparation. So, visiting a lawyer who scares you with lots of detailed information is quite different from the celebratory aspect of a wedding or a celebration. But at the same time, it's pretty important.
So do you think maybe even pushing the conversation earlier, say when the engagement happens, or like you said, even before that, potentially is going to create for a healthier conversation overall?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say you probably wouldn't want it to be a surprise. So you wouldn't want it to be something that's brought up a couple of weeks before the wedding. So depending on how long the relationship has been for, it could be helpful to bring it up even before the engagement. So, as you're kind of making plans as a couple. So, most couples do get to that stage where there is that commitment and they're definitely together and they're planning a future get together. It could be helpful to even gradually bring it up, or, share anecdotes or stories about, about prenups. So I guess what we're wanting to do is really normalize it and start the conversation so that it doesn't come up all of a sudden. And if you're the partner who wants a prenup, that's a great way to sense or get a feel about how comfortable your partner is with it as well, and whether this is an issue for them. Because it's not only is it sensitive because you're talking about potentially worst case scenario, we're also talking about money, which has amount of implications. And again, everybody has a different relationship with money. For some people, it's a source of a huge amount of anxiety and concern. For others, it's to do with power and independence. So getting a sense of, for your partner, is this something that's going to set something off in them, or is it something that will just be really easy to kind of sort out?
Makes total sense. And I wanted to give our audience an opportunity to see a conversation in action. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'd love to model out how to actually talk to your partner. And I'm going to try to play the partner who doesn't want the prenup, just so that we could get a little variety in here and test your skills. So I would love, walk us through how one should even approach that discussion.
Okay, great. So like with any big conversations, the first thing we would really want to make sure happens, and it's amazing how often this doesn't happen, is that we do not want to bring it up at a time when, we're stressed, tired, sick, there's other stuff going on. So these are the sort of conversations that you really want to be having over like breakfast on the weekend, or, kind of relaxing, somewhere nice and comfortable. So I guess that's the first thing, is that if your emotional resources are topped up and you're in a safe environment, the conversation is going to go much better. And that even involves making sure that you haven't been drinking, that sort of thing. So we know that having big conversations when we're affected by alcohol can often escalate because we're less inhibited and more emotional. So that's the first step, is pick a good time. Maybe partner some warning that you want to have a chat about something important. So say it's nothing bad, I just really wanted to talk to you about this thing that I've been thinking about for a while and that I think is really, really important, and I'd love to get your perspective on it. So give them a bit of warning, and again, that allows them time to make sure they've got emotional resources in place. After that, once you've kind of set up the nice relaxing scene, you could probably say something like, okay, what I wanted to talk to you about was this idea of, as we're looking at a life together and living together and sharing a life together, I know that the topic of money and assets is really important, and we want to get it sorted from the very beginning. And I wanted to see what you thought about the idea of a prenuptial agreement. Is this something that you've thought about? What are your thoughts on that generally?
And one thing in this dynamic is, sometimes people have a lot of baggage around what a prenup means. And it, like you said, it's like, oh, you're trying to pull one over, or you're trying to protect something. What if I don't respond well to it? What if I'm the partner who says, what? Why are you asking me this? What are you trying to accomplish here? What do you do in that context?
Yeah, well, I would say, and again, it's really good to sort of almost not predict that, but prepare for that and understand that, like prenups have a terrible reputation from all the is, but even say to them, I understand this is a really emotional topic. Obviously, it involves money, and also we really don't want to talk about what happens in the worst case scenario. But from my understanding, this is something that a lot of couples do when there's wealth and assets on both sides, and it's really it's kind of an administrative thing as well. And also, if you as my partner are feeling worried or concerned, the really important thing to remember is that we do both have our own lawyers. So this isn't about me protecting my wealth from you and saying I'm going to keep everything. It's about both of us being fairly represented. So if we were to go into this, what would need to happen is that I'd have my own legal advice, you'd have your own legal advice, and they would really advocate for you, and they'd figure out a way for us to reach an agreement. And this just means that in the future, things will be a lot more straightforward if anything does happen. And it means that if our relationship isn't going well, we don't have to deal with it then. And then you could probably check in with them and say, I know this is really tough. Can you tell me about if anything's coming up for you? I understand that this is really sensitive to talk about, particularly while our relationship is going so well.
Yeah. Does it ever make sense at that point, or even, earlier in the conversation, to consider bringing in a more professional person who can share more of the sort of nuts and bolts of what a prenup actually means or how it's used? Or is there a different way to get access to that information?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably a good idea. Like with anything, the more we know about it and the more educated we are about it, the more accepting and tolerating of it is. So even, I'm sure that there's video resources and articles and, YouTube videos, that sort of thing, that perhaps you could even share with your partner, or, to be able to get them to understand that this is a process thing. It's not that you think that the relationship's going to fail or you want to take advantage of them. It's more just that this is important, and you feel like it's important to safeguard for the relationship.
That makes a ton of sense. And in terms of the nuts and bolts, because this is a question that I get a lot. How does one even go about getting a prenup? I personally, my own story, I joke about this, is my husband and I got a $20 prenup because I went to Google and I said, hey, Google, can you help me find a prenup template? Not necessarily the right advice for the rest of the world, by the way. But it was actually shocking to me how little I knew about how to actually go do it. Can you just talk to us a little bit about how it works?
Sure. So the general advice would be, it's sort of the same as like finding a therapist or finding, a doctor, is to ask around your networks for a family law professional. A lot of, I know at least in Australia, and I'm pretty sure here, like a lot of, law services are dedicated to family law. So that involves divorce proceedings, but also prenups, estate planning, that sort of thing. So that would be great to find either a recommended family law firm that's highly rated, check them out on their website, make sure that they, you know, that they seem to be credentialed and they seem to also have a level of empathy as well. Because I think that's really important, is that if you find a lawyer who you feel comfortable with, and often family lawyers are lovely because, you know, they kind of, you know, they've gone to this profession partly for that reason, to, you know, to work with people. So, you know, I think it's good to really do some research and find family law firm that's, you know, within your price range, that you feel you can share and trust things with. And even to be prepared to, you know, to kind of get a bit emotional in the session. Like, that's not unusual for people to go to their lawyer and the lawyer asks them all these questions about individual and, you know, their partner's wealth. And it's a lot, you know, it's a lot to kind of think about. But essentially the lawyer is really there to be your advocate, and they are going to give you the very best advice. So they're not going to sugarcoat it, and, you know, they'll call you on it if you are seeming to be, you know, kind of backing off or that sort of thing. So I think it's great to have someone in your corner who's trained and professional. So yeah, that would be generally how you do it, is find, you know, Google friends, and then secure the lawyer. And probably you'll be charged a fee for the first session. So they'll give you advice, and then they'll kind of talk you through the next steps. But I'd say the other piece of advice is to make sure that you really know what you want before you go in to the first. So to figure out what it is that you're, that's important to you and what you need, because obviously you don't want to be having like appointment after appointment with a lawyer. They pretty pricey.
And you mentioned this briefly, but I wanted to just touch on it for a second. Each partner needs a legal representation in a prenup. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. And that's the whole, you know, I think that's a really nice part of the process, is that that means that, and you know, the lawyers are, if you're their client, they're really going to go into bat for you. So you're essentially, you know, they're in your corner essentially, and they will work with your partner's lawyer to get the best possible agreement.
That makes complete sense. And the last question I had for you on this was, can you change a prenup? Like, what if you disagree with what you guys agreed to in the beginning?
Yeah, you can change a prenup if both parties agree. So again, you're looking at way more legal fees.
Yeah.
Sometimes, say a partner comes into significant wealth, or, you know, there's changes in the circumstances in the marriage, then perhaps a renegotiation is, you know, is at hand. But again, it's really important then to make sure that, yeah, you've still got your legal representation, and you can again establish with them actually why you're changing it and the reasons for changing it.
This is fantastic. Thank you so much. This is all we have time for today, but I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you. This is, I think, the nuts and bolts and the meat and potatoes of relationships, right? Like it's intense, it's important, but it's also, I think, a highly rewarding conversation if you can figure out how to navigate it. So for those of you who are tuning in, feel free to ask us or add any other questions you have about prenups below, and we'll be sure to cover them in our next Q&A about it. In the meanwhile, signing off, and thank you.